what we will find is that our phones at some point in time, maybe not by 2030, maybe slightly beyond, will get replaced by a smart glass. So that is what we are looking at it from a demand and supply perspective, is the evolution of what I would call as intelligent immersion. We are seeing the pace at which AI is developing. AI blended with XR.
This is Inspiring Design, where unique innovators come together to share their knowledge, share their insight, and keep us up to date with the latest industry trends. And here's your host, Rashan Senanayake.
Welcome back to the next episode of Season 5. We're on a roll featuring some of the most amazing speakers discussing the latest in emerging technologies, and today is no different. Sitting here with me, I have one of the most renowned minds in the topic of spatial computing. He's an amazing mind currently leading multiple global roles in the metaverse, XR, and emerging technologies ecosystem. And he literally knows more than 10,000 entities globally in this space. And he's none other than Pradeep Khanna. Recently, Pradeep was invited by the Secretary General of the OECD to speak on immersive technologies at the inaugural Global Technologies Forum, which was attended by 300 plus policy leaders from all over the world, including ministers from the UK, Spain, Japan, Saudi Arabia, and more. He is the CEO of Global Mindset and an executive director, Asia Pacific, Sydney president, and global co-chair for the Education Global Virtual Reality Association, VRARA. Pradeep has over 30 plus years of executive experience and has been a leader for IBM Australia, leveraging India, China, Philippines, Vietnam, Egypt, Romania, Brazil, and Argentina, not to mention being an adjunct professor at multiple universities in Asia and Australia. Consider yourself lucky as we're about to learn from him, so let's get straight into it. All right, well, here we go with another episode of Inspiring Design. Pradeep, thank you so much for giving up your time to be here with us. And you're, I think, one of the most sought after minds in this planet if it comes to this technology as well. So I'm really privileged to actually have you here so the listeners can learn from you as well. So as usual, before we do kick off, can you give us a little bit of a background about yourself, your story? Where do you hail from?
Thank you very much, Rashan. First of all, thank you for having me on your podcast. I migrated from India about, 33 years back. And I've been living in Sydney for the last 33 years. 25 years back, I was a senior executive with Austrade, looking after international business, World Bank ADB projects, and also managing an infrastructure project finance program. Then I went on to do my MBA from AGSM, which is UNSW. And then later I was doing some strategy consulting, and I'm talking of 1999, just before Y2K, when technology was getting very hot. I got an offer from IBM, so I joined IBM. I had some interesting stints with IBM. I don't know whether you remember that Lenovo is an offshoot of IBM.
Yes.
In fact, it was the personal computing division or the hardware division of IBM. And at the time of the separation, I was the Asia Pacific deployment planning manager for that separation. Then later on, a company bought MERS Data in Denmark. I was again the Asia Pacific manager for integration for that MERS Data. Then later on, I was asked to set up the global delivery business for IBM Australia and New Zealand, and I built up into a significant business leveraging India, China, Philippines, Vietnam, Egypt, Romania, Argentina, Brazil.
Wow.
And the next phase of my life, Surprise, surprise. I come with an international business, technology management, business management background, and somehow we landed up into my own consulting focused onto education and training.
Mm-hmm.
It falls into how technology and globalization are reshaping education and training. In fact, in 2013, we were the first ones to organize a session on MOOCs.
Mm.
We had the president of edX, which was a joint venture between Harvard and MIT,
Mm-hmm.
giving the keynote for that session.
Mm-hmm.
And we established a global brand in this business, focused specifically onto Asia Pacific. In the next phase of my career, I moved on into emerging tech and
Mm-hmm.
specifically into VR, AR, MR, XR. Where we are today, I have a number of global roles in this ecosystem.
Mm-hmm.
I am the executive director Asia Pacific for the world's largest emerging tech association, VRARA.
Mm-hmm.
I'm also one of the global co-chairs for education, and I'm also the Australia president. We have, well over thousands and thousands of people all over the world in our community, and 50, 60, or whatever number of chapters all over the world.
Mm-hmm.
My second role is where I'm working with international entities to look at standards, taxonomy, and interoperability between different platforms in this ecosystem.
Mm-hmm.
Third role is where we're helping to develop a marketplace purely because there is information asymmetry between demand and supply.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of education required. My fourth role is that I'm an adjunct professor across a number of places in Australia, Asia.
Mm-hmm.
My fifth role is I'm on advisory boards of companies in Australia and Asia. My sixth role is I'm a co-founder of an initiative called InSquare, which is focused on sustainability, inclusion, and emerging trends. And there are a couple of other roles floating around.
Yeah, wow. You've, I think, probably got one of the most extensive resumes on this planet, and you may have found 24 hours in the day, a couple of extra hours to go through those. It's very impressive. But I think you are the right man for the job to talk about these emerging tech. You have experiences in education. So let's get straight into it. So one of the main things that commonly gets asked is, in this spatial computing context, you already mentioned the words virtual reality, augmented reality. What's the difference between all of these different types of realities, in your words?
Let me give you an example. Today, we are sitting in a Zoom call,
Mm-hmm.
but we are very much anchored onto the real world.
Mm-hmm.
Let's say, Rashan, that I was in Brisbane, or let me give you an education context. That if I was, in a classroom and teaching on a face-to-face basis, that is what I would call as the real reality.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes.
On the other hand, if I wanted to get an experience of landing on Moon or Mars,
Mm-hmm.
that is physically not possible, unless, of course, you're Elon Musk, but I'm not Elon Musk. So, how best do you get that experience?
Mm-hmm.
So, you go into an artificial environment. That artificial environment is called virtual reality,
Mm-hmm.
where you are able to get an experience which is physically not possible, maybe too risky to build, or too expensive to build.
Mm-hmm.
Now, as you go from the real world to the virtual world, the entire spectrum is called mixed reality.
Mm-hmm.
And let me again take the analogy of education and training. Like I said, that if I was sitting in a classroom, I would be in face-to-face teaching. On the other hand, if I was teaching through an online platform, and the spectrum in between would be called blended reality, which is not blended reality, but blended learning.
Mm-hmm.
That would be some combination of real and virtual learning.
Mm-hmm.
Likewise, in the XR, MR, or immersive tech ecosystem, the spectrum as you go from the real world to the virtual world is called mixed reality.
Mm-hmm.
And any point in that spectrum is some combination of the real world and the virtual world. The first point or a milestone that we define in that spectrum is augmented reality.
Mm-hmm.
Augmented reality is when you are anchored onto the real world, but you have digital objects. And let me give you an example. And the most famous or the earliest example in this case is IKEA.
Mm-hmm.
IKEA used to have their catalogs, and if you scan the catalogs, and let's say that you wanted to buy a table.
Mm-hmm.
So when you scan the catalog, a digital image of the table came in front of you. You are still very much in the real world.
Mm-hmm.
And you could decide where to place that table. You could decide whether I want to go for a black table or a brown table or a white table.
Mm-hmm.
That is an example of augmented reality, where you are in the real world, but you've got digital objects in front of you.
And that IKEA example is viewing that object through a phone.
You could have an app
Mm-hmm.
which is operating through a phone,
Mm-hmm.
or it could be operating through a tablet, or it could be operating as you go higher up through a smart glass,
Mm-hmm.
or it could be through devices like HoloLens,
Mm-hmm.
or it could be even higher up devices like Apple's Vision Pro.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So that's the range that we're talking about, you know. So the
Beautiful.
very basic augmented reality experience is through an app on your mobile phone.
Perfect. Perfect. And I think
Now,
you, oh, sorry. Yeah, you keep going.
as you move further down, there's actually another point in the spectrum, because as you move further down, you're increasing the digital content up to a point in time where the entire environment becomes digital. And that is what is called virtual reality.
Mm-hmm.
Now, as we said earlier, that this entire spectrum is called mixed reality. And obviously, there was a lot of confusion between what is mixed reality and what is augmented reality. Now, the difference basically is that mixed reality is the entire spectrum from real world to the virtual world,
Mm-hmm.
whereas augmented reality is just one point in that spectrum.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the acronyms were tending to increase. So, a new terminology came about called XR, which is extended reality.
Mm-hmm.
And what that meant was all forms of AR, VR, MR are included under the umbrella terminology of XR.
Mm-hmm.
So that is what it would be in terms of what these different acronyms are.
Perfect. And I think you explained that beautifully, just going through it step by step, and it'll definitely help even myself understand the differences between these technologies. Now, you did mention some of the brands that are out there, some companies such as Apple and the HoloLens from Microsoft and so forth. In your thought process and what you're seeing, what are the best brands that are playing in this space?
That's a very good question. And to answer that, I will, give you an example that on 6 June 2023, I was invited by the Secretary General of OECD to speak in Paris on immersive technologies to 300 plus policy leaders from all over the world,
Mm-hmm.
which included ministers from various countries and so on and so forth, and people also from education policy background.
Mm-hmm.
Now, on 5th of June last year, Apple launched their device called Vision Pro.
Mm-hmm.
So they asked me in that conference that, look, do you think Apple's Vision Pro is the tipping point where it will lead to mass adoption?
Mm-hmm.
And what I said was that, look, if I gave you $3,500 US, and that is the cost of Apple's Vision Pro,
Mm-hmm.
gave you the choice of buying a color TV or a MacBook Pro or a Vision Pro, what would you buy? And that would answer your question.
Mm-hmm.
And why I'm giving this example is that there are different players, but you see, it depends on what kind of a budget you have, depends on what kind of a quality you are looking for. So there are various options which look at trading off this cost quality variables.
Mm-hmm.
So therefore, you can have a very simple um, uh, mobile phone app which gives you an experience, or you can have a very, very expensive, you know, Apple's Vision Pro. So all these hardware tend to have their own nuances.
Mm-hmm.
But let me kind of make one thing very clear that I think we are, insofar as the hardware is concerned, we are still not there. We are still
Mm-hmm.
about 2 to 3 years away where we find the perfect, or what I would say, the optimum hardware. And I think most likely it's going to be a smart glass at an affordable price and giving you the experience that most of the people would like to have.
Is that similar to the Meta's research project that you're seeing with their smart glass sunglasses, essentially the standard ones that they're releasing but not available to the public?
So see, there are various things. Meta has released a sunglass along with Ray-Ban,
Mm-hmm.
which is not exactly an XR smart glass.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Uh, Let me give you how a smart glass would work.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if I were traveling, let's say hypothetically, from Sydney to Brisbane, and I was using a GPS, I would be looking at the GPS all the while and, turning left, right, going straight, or whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
On the other hand, if I was wearing a smart glass, I would find that those directions are coming on the screen, on the
Mm-hmm.
windscreen of the car in front of me.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So that is essentially what we are talking about. And Meta's work, like so many other people's work, is still work in progress at this particular point in time. Every major company has got patents on smart glasses,
Mm-hmm.
but like I said, the perfect smart glass is still some time off.
Yeah, yeah. No, that's fair enough. And where do you see this kind of going, let's say by the year of 2030, 2035? How do you see this kind of space evolving? And what do you think we can expect almost from these big players?
So this is again an excellent question. And from 2030 perspective, let's look at, what's going to be the demographics like in 2030.
Mm-hmm.
At that particular point in time, 65% of the population will be consisting of Gen Z and Gen Alpha.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what are Gen Alpha? I'll talk about that just now. Whereas 45% of the workforce will be Gen Z and Gen Alpha.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Gen Alpha are people who are born after 2010.
Mm-hmm.
And by the way, people born after 2025, which is yet to come, will be called Gen Beta.
Gen Beta.
And Gen Z, as we know, are people who are born after 1995.
Mm-hmm.
So we are talking about those digital natives. So on the demand side, we will be seeing by 2030 that most of the people on this planet, or a significant part of the people on this planet, will be from Gen Z and Gen Alpha
Mm-hmm.
age groups. These are the digital natives who have born, they may not even have seen anything other than iPhone, or, not Gen Z so much, but especially Gen Alpha.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that is from the demand side. On the supply side, what we will find is that our phones at some point in time, maybe not by 2030, maybe slightly beyond, will get replaced by a smart glass.
Mm-hmm.
So that is what we are looking at it from a demand and supply perspective, is the evolution of what I would call as intelligent immersion.
Mm-hmm.
We are seeing the pace at which AI is developing. AI blended with XR is what we will see by 2030 or beyond.
I love that actually, because I think we're starting to see a pattern where all of these quote unquote emerging technologies are having this convergence points where I think AI mixing with extended reality, even quantum computing, blockchain, cybersecurity, all of these elements are kind of coming into this singularity almost. But do you think 2030 is an age where that kind of thing we would start to see more and more, given the short time frame left?
So there have been number of surveys in this regard, and one very interesting one is by Pew, and Pew forecasts that by 2040 is when we will see 50% of the population, who are able to access the relevant hardware will be accessing these, what I would call as spatial computing or immersive technologies. So we are talking of a timeline almost about 15 years from now on. But I must give it a caveat that look, we can't even forecast 6 months ahead.
Yes.
Are forecasting 15 years ahead,
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's completely fair. And I think looking at where these speculative projections go, one of the things that I always like to talk about is the importance of it in the education space. Now, you're also in multiple different types of education spaces. You're also a global coach. Where do you think the importance of it, of this type of emerging tech, spatial computing, sits within the education sector?
Very, very important. In fact, at the moment, number of governments in Asia Pacific have been reaching out to me to build up centers of excellence and to position their specific countries for this oncoming wave. We talked about milestones like 2030 and 2040 and so on and so forth. But you see, you look at it from the basic 101, as I mentioned, from a demand and a supply perspective, we see trends start emerging around 2028, 2030, and then picking up speed thereafter. Now, when we come down to education and training, now we've got to remember a couple of things. First of all, what is our attention span? Our attention span is 8 seconds. We forget almost 50% within 1 hour. And then we've got the 70-20-10 rule, where 70% of our learning happens through personal experiences. 20% happens through interaction or social interactions. And 10% is only through classroom learning. And when we combine the two together, it is obvious that the future classrooms, you are looking at, new kind of experimental ways of learning and teaching. And the project-based learning, takes predominance.
Yes.
And in that project-based learning, what better environment than spatial computing, where you've got a uniform, layers of both virtual and the real environment blending seamlessly for students to learn. And also look at it from the content perspective. Because once you create a content for XR or for spatial computing for that matter, that content can be reused again and again. Let me give you some examples. And this is where it comes down to, when you look at the education and training ecosystem, you can clearly see two different distinct worlds. The world of education, which has K to 12 or school education, and higher ed as two basic blocks. The world of training has number of multiple blocks, which has both vocational education and training, corporate learning, and lifelong learning, which are skills oriented. And then you've got early childhood learning floating somewhere around the two. Now, each of these segments, when we look at broadly in terms of how this is impacting education and training, in this number of ways. When you look at education per se, it is in pedagogy. How do you blend XR, or for that matter, spatial computing in pedagogy?
Mm-hmm.
Number two is in setting up labs. Number three is in doing research.
Mm-hmm.
Number four is in creating studios. Number five is in teacher training.
Mm-hmm.
Number six is there are so many other ways in specifically in teaching technologies related to emerging technologies, stuff like 3D modeling, Unity,
Mm-hmm.
and so on and so forth. When it comes to skills, just imagine, onboarding, safety training,
Mm-hmm.
regulatory training. And let me give you another example. Let's say, that I'm joining a company, let's say IBM.
Mm-hmm.
I am joining them in Sydney, but I need to have a better understanding of what our global headquarters at Armonk looks like, because I may be traveling over there or whatever it is, kind of a thing.
Mm-hmm.
I can get a virtual walkthrough of that,
Mm-hmm.
or I actually land in Armonk. When I join, I can easily get trained up onto how do I process my leave application, how do I process my timesheets, and so on and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
So there are so many different, kind of ways where the business case is so strong, and that is why our the children or the learners have to get used to, and not used to, but like I mentioned, that by 2030 or so, most of these people are going to be very digitally savvy.
Mm.
They
Yes.
will automatically start blending into these kind of environments.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. I think that's well said. And I think the uh, issue that I see, given the breadth and the magnitude of what's required in embedding these types of technologies and the importance of it, even for the different types of education context, is how the actual educator is actually trained, because they're the ones who are in front of the students on a daily basis. They're the ones who are almost have to use the technology on a daily basis. And this is one of the reasons that we work with educators quite closely as well. But one of the issues that we constantly see is the policy issues that comes with, especially here in Australia, the context of policy and technology doesn't always marry up or evolve in the same speed. What are your thoughts on how policy should be adjusted to fit this type of technology, given its importance?
So, in this question, I would like to refer to two places, that is Stanford and
Mm-hmm.
Vancouver.
Mm-hmm.
When I travel to Vancouver, I find that from the policy perspective, it is so supportive of emerging tech.
Mm-hmm.
The whole ecosystem blends naturally. And Stanford or the Bay Area or the Silicon Valley needs no explanation. And there
Mm-hmm.
have been enough, kind of workshops, discussions that how do we replicate that model, in different parts of the world.
Mm-hmm.
And the question is that really it is not about replicating.
Mm-hmm.
It is about how do you get different stakeholders to work together.
Mm-hmm.
And there is no two ways that policy has to play a very, very important role in building up, getting together the different stakeholders.
Mm-hmm.
And that is, I think, the key in trying to build up such an ecosystem. Now comes the question of, but there are other issues also. And what you mentioned about educators is a reality that even today there is a mismatch in terms of digital skills of
Mm-hmm.
the students as compared to the educators.
Absolutely.
And this is only going to widen as
Mm.
the years go by. So a lot of effort has to be in looking at how do we get the educators as part of the ecosystem and with an innovative mindset.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
once again, I think policy has a very, very important role
Mm.
creating this.
Absolutely, and I think that's well said, and it's definitely music to my ears when what you're how you're placing the advice here as well. And what are your thoughts on at a classroom level, even at an educator level? What are some of the strategies that they could use to even just take a few steps to understand what exactly is spatial computing and kind of at least chip away at that lifelong learning context? What are some strategies that they could do?
So spatial computing, and of course, there's a lot of discussion as to what is the difference between spatial computing and extended reality or mixed reality
Mm.
for that
Mm-hmm.
matter. So, and then essentially the difference between the two is where in spatial computing, you are talking about a seamless interaction where both the physical and the virtual worlds coexist.
Mm-hmm.
And in a human computer interacted manner, and you can oscillate in and out of any kind of environment in a very seamless way.
Mm-hmm.
And to the same extent, mixed reality also does, but mixed reality talks in terms of different finite points over there, like augmented reality and so on and so forth, and virtual reality and so on and so forth. Similar concepts. Now, these are very experiential.
Mm-hmm.
That I can talk for donkey number of hours. Once I, get you to experience it, there is a different kind of a learning process by itself.
Absolutely. And I see that almost every single time we have educators that put the headsets on for the first time or view something through their phone, it does actually have a whole different experiential side of things.
And here again also comes in the point that when I mentioned about that we are far away from, still about 2 to 3 years away from, the tipping point per se is because
Mm,
many a times, especially when it comes to, and here is again, a debate point, whether it'll be VR or whether it'll be XR, and whether even when we talk in terms of the metaverse, what will be the access point? Will it be VR or will it be AR? The reality is that we don't want to be sitting with a head mounted device 24 by 7.
yes.
Like you get somebody to experience it and then you get him to experience it again and again. And the second time, he or she may not be that keen.
Hmm.
And that is why we are still about 2 to 3 years away from the perfect kind of a, hardware which will
Hmm.
provide us a seamless experience. And that is why, AR for that matter is, all what you would do is just you are still very much anchored in the real world.
Hmm.
And, using a simple, just a mobile phone, you are able to get that experience.
Mm,
Give you an
yes.
example that I travel all over the world as I'm invited to speak at various conferences.
Hmm.
Before COVID, I was traveling to Nanjing in China. And China at that point in time itself was creating 9 cities as XR focused cities.
Hmm.
So after the conference was over, I went down just like, wanting to see as a tourist if there is anything to see in Nanjing while I'm there.
Hmm.
The last day, I went to a temple which was couple of thousand years old and had got burned down number of times.
Hmm.
Now, when I went inside, they had a holographic display which was actually showing, how the temple got burned down, how the temple was rebuilt, and the learning impact was so powerful. It was
Mm,
fabulous.
mm,
I'll give you another example, and this is all I'm talking about pre-COVID, examples. That I was in South Korea, in Seoul, speaking at a conference. And in the evening, one day, I went to one of the malls.
mm,
There was a Hyundai showroom where you could actually go in, put a VR mounted device, and look at designing the car in terms of color and bells and whistles, and see what exactly you wanted. And then you could walk out of the shop without buying or after buying. But that's why, when both the examples are in terms of experiential learning, so that is where I come back to that, the strategies have to be very much experiential, project based learning, collaborative, when people have to get these people to understand and not we have to take when we look at these technologies there are three perspectives. One is a business or a consumer perspective, and I would call education as the business or the industry for that matter. Second is the design or creative perspective, and the third of course is the technology perspective.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what is happening is that most of the time the discussions are happening only at technology level.
Mm-hmm.
Man, there are 6 degrees of freedom. Does really anybody care about 6 degrees of freedom? So that is what when we have to do in terms of strategy is that take out the technology out of the equation and
Mm-hmm.
come down to 101 and then get people to experience and learn about these.
Yeah, I think that's well said. And even those example applications that you mentioned, there is a level of domain industry knowledge, like contextualizing to whatever that might be, the experience is connected to. But there's also a level of critical thinking there. And I think the people that use this technology in a good way always has the thinking component going hand in hand with its technological capability. And that's what I'm seeing. I think even in the pattern with the different examples, it's over and over again evident where people who implement and build these things, they're not thinking of it just as a consumer point of view. They're always thinking of it as what's the potential of using this technology to convey a particular experience. And they do come at it from a 101 perspective and working with the technology's evolution as it develops. So I love what you're saying. And what's your advice? And if there were students listening in on this episode, the Gen Zs, the Gen Alphas, what's your advice for their success, especially in the usage of extended reality, spatial computing, and so forth?
So this doesn't relate specifically only to XR or spatial computing for that matter.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a mentor at so many different places, and I always tell people that you got to find your passion
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and then you got to follow your passion. Of course, the challenge is who pays the bills when you follow the passion.
Mm-hmm.
So, therefore, one has to strike the right balance in following the passion and making sure that the bills are being followed.
Mm,
So
absolutely.
all what I ask, everybody is that look, you know, end of the day, you know, find your passion in, and it just doesn't matter what your passion is. Hmm.
Mm-hmm.
If you want to be a commercial success, then it also is worthwhile to looking at which industry are you, focusing on from your passion perspective. Is the industry growing, not growing?
Mm. Yes.
What are the future trends to look at it? Because end of the day, these have very important bearing on not only on the bills paid, but also on to what kind of a success you will have in pursuing your goals.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So
Perfectly said. I think very balanced approach there. Now, if there's any educators or anyone that's actually interested in learning about spatial computing, anything about virtual, extended, augmented, do you have any resources that you can suggest that people can learn from on this topic?
So here I would just like to highlight that the ecosystem is very opaque at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll give you an example that I was, a couple of months back, I was in Dhaka in Bangladesh. And I traveled to, Bangladesh and another country to see whether to open chapters for VR, AR and all that. And
Mm-hmm.
I was staying in a hotel, and the evening, the hotel general manager came and met me, and he said that he's got a 360 done of the hotel.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I was looking at him because here is a non-techo and talking about 360 in a place like Dhaka. I said, wow, so where did you get it done from? He says, I
Mm-hmm.
couldn't find anybody in Dhaka, so I got it done from India.
Mm-hmm.
So next day I was meeting 10 companies in Dhaka alone, which had a headcount of about 30, 35 people each in XR.
Mm-hmm.
So the ecosystem is such that, there is, the demand doesn't know where the supply is, the supply doesn't know where the demand is. And the ecosystem, especially on the content side, is littered with small to medium enterprises.
Mm-hmm.
Person, 5 people, 25 people is what, can be like a decent size.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Now, in this kind of an ecosystem, it's very difficult to know what is happening in this emerging tech all over the world. And it is extremely important for anyone to be across what is happening all over the world. And there is no point in developing solutions which have already been developed by somebody else.
Mm.
Just go ahead and partner. Now, for doing all this, it is very important to be part of a community which is
Mm-hmm.
focused on emerging tech. And although I come with a VRARA hat, by no means am I propagating that, you join. Of course, I would want you to join VRARA, but I would say that join any community which gives you a global perspective of what is happening in this emerging tech all over the world. What
Mm-hmm.
is happening in your chosen area? If you are an educator, what is happening in education and training all over the world? And if you are a solution provider, then develop your or look for solutions and look for your unique value proposition. So, extremely important to be part of a community or part of a network, because that is where today resources are scarce.
Mm.
And as we all know, you will get tons of resources on the net, but either they'll be too general or they'll
Mm-hmm.
be so technical that they are not of any meaningful use for that matter.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So this is what I would recommend, that yes, join a community. Yes, I would welcome you to join VRARA. Yes, you'll get any of these communities, you'll get dedicated sets of resources, which are available to you, and networks.
Love it. That's really good advice, I think. And I'm usually thinking on the fly when it comes to this last mystery question, and it's something that I've been thinking I wanted to ask you right from the beginning, even when I actually met you for the very first time a few months ago. Was if you had to pick your favorite virtual reality or augmented reality experience, is there a favorite application that you use or an experience?
So again, the thing is that I know more than 10,000 entities all over the world.
Mm-hmm.
Every day I meet different companies, and I'm meeting new companies every day. That is what the nature of the ecosystem is.
Mm-hmm.
Now I find that there is a range of solutions, and again the 70-20-10 rule comes into play, that you find that only 10% of the solutions actually are really excellent in the current.
Mm.
So I would say that the range of solutions, but I would specifically highlight training and remote collaboration
Mm-hmm.
as examples which have absolutely phenomenal application, and extremely, there are hundreds and hundreds of companies into this and doing it very well.
Mm.
Without naming a company or a solution provider, I would talk about remote collaboration and training as two specific examples, which are absolutely fabulous insofar as immersive tech is concerned.
Perfect, perfect. I've experienced a couple myself in the different types of headsets, so really love what you've shared here today. Thank you so much, and there's so much breadth of knowledge, and I feel like we could talk for hours and hours here. But thank you so much for Pradeep and giving up your time. It's really valuable, I think, for the listeners to learn from such a global mind such as yourself and draw on from your experiences. So really appreciate it. Thank you.
Likewise, it was lovely to be on the podcast, Rashan, and look forward to interacting more.
That's it for today's episode. Now it's time to take action and build on the learnings to get inspired. First up, jump onto rashansenanayake.com/podcast and check out the show notes, links, and other relevant learning materials from this amazing episode. Next, if you learned something new today, click that subscribe button and set yourself up to receive live notifications on future episodes, as well as more opportunities to learn from our amazing guests, brands, and speakers. Last but not least, it's time to have your say. Join the conversation and share your thoughts and feedback on today's episode with a review, all while joining many others with a 5-star rating for Inspiring Design with Rashan Senanayake. Till next time.